Are you sitting down? You should sit down. You'll want to sit down for this one, because I've given this information to plenty of people in the past, and every time I do, they're just absolutely floored. So public service announcement, just last chance. So have you ever wondered what goes into your credit score? Okay, how is this score actually determined? Whether it's Equifax or TransUnion, have you ever wondered? Well, I'm here to tell you how it's done. Okay, now let me be clear, I can't tell you the minutia. Okay, this is a lot like the Coca-Cola formula. If you ask me what's in Coca-Cola, I know there's a lot of carbonated water and a hell of a lot of sugar. There's some other thingies in there. I don't really know what it is. Phosphoric acid. But I can't tell you the nitty gritty and the process of how they developed Coca-Cola, but I got a pretty good idea of what's in there, and so do you. Same thing goes with the credit report. We actually know a little more than the Coca-Cola formula. We don't know exactly how every single algorithm works, but and this is not unique to me. Anyone in the business will know what goes into the credit score. But to the layman, to the average person, they don't know, and when they do find out, it's usually shocking. So here's the thing. You may want to grab a pen and paper, because you're going to have to keep score. I don't have any visual aids, all right? But if you do keep score, it'll help. So the first thing you need to know that determines your credit score is what's known as payment history. Payment history is, write this down, 35% of your score. So 35% of your score is determined by your payment history. What does that mean? Payment history simply is, do you make payments? And do you make them on time? Now, sounds pretty straightforward. First thing that may jump out at you is that that's a pretty high total, 35%. Okay, that's true, it is. But payments are important. Now, bigger question is, what is a payment? Well, a payment can be determined two ways. The first is, let's say you have a credit card and you use it, and the bill comes and it says, please pay by the 30th of the month. And on the 29th or the 30th, you make a payment. You pay the bill in full. Let's say the bill is for $500. You pay $500. You've made a payment. Terrific. But what if you pay the minimum payment? Maybe the minimum payment's only $50. Well, as far as Equifax and TransUnion are concerned, that is still a payment. Now, anyone who knows anything about credit cards and revolving credit knows, hey, you don't want to make that minimum payment if you can avoid it. You want to pay the bill in full. If you don't pay the full $500 in this case, anything left over, well, there's going to be interest applied to that. And of course, if it's a credit card, you're looking at anywhere from 11.99 to 34.99% interest. Not fun. So right off the bat, this should trigger something in your mind that, wait a second, 35% of my score is, do I at least make a minimum payment on time for this particular credit instrument? Whether or not I make the maximum or the minimum doesn't seem to really affect this, and it doesn't. The Equifax and TransUnion do not discriminate. As long as you pay what's required on time, 35% of your score. 15% of your score is payment history. How long have you been making payments on that particular credit card? Have you had that credit card for 1 month, for a year, for a decade? That's 15% of your score. So just in case you're not writing it down, let's review. 35% payment history, 15% length of history. 50% of your score is, do you pay the bill on time, effectively? Okay, 35 plus 15, half your score. What's the rest? Well, another 10% of your score is determined by credit type, or as I like to call it, diversity of credit. In other words, what kinds of credit products do you have? The Bureau doesn't want you to have 15 credit cards and nothing else. They like to see that you have a credit card, revolving account, a loan, an installment account, maybe a line of credit, it's another type of revolving account, maybe another credit card, maybe a car loan. They like to see that you can handle different types of credit. Now, this makes sense. Revolving credit is quite different from installment credit. Revolving credit, as you may know, a credit card, you use it, and whatever you do over the following month revolves into the next month. So if I use my credit card, I use $500, then I pay $400, that $100 carries over into the next month. Whatever I do that month gets put on top, there's interest, and you get the idea. It keeps revolving and keeps adjusting with each passing month. Sometimes you may go a month without using your credit card. Another month you may max it out. Depends. Installment credit is something like a car loan or just a regular loan. You make the same payment at regular intervals, whether it's monthly or bi-weekly, all the time, doesn't really change. And it has a declining balance. Okay? It doesn't go up and down and up and down. It just either declines or it floats if you make minimum payments, say on a loan, though usually term loans won't be set that way. A line of credit would, and that's revolving. Okay, so that's 10% of your score. What kind of credit do you have? Credit type. So again, for the scorekeepers, 35 payment history, 15% length of history, 10% for credit type. 35, 15, 10, we're up to 60%. All right. Another 10% is new credit. And by new credit, meaning did you apply for credit? Were you approved? Were you rejected? How much were you approved for? How often do you apply? This affects your score 10%. So, when you get approved for new credit, that's good. You were approved. At the same time, when you have a hard hit on your credit, your score can go down ever so slightly because you asked for credit. A lot of people get into trouble because they keep asking for credit. Little tip, guys, okay? Nickel's worth of free advice. You don't want more than 3 hard hits in a rolling 12-month period. All right? Very quickly. So that is 10% as well. Now let's do one final total before we get to the really interesting part. 35 for payment history, 15% for how long you've length of history, 10% for credit type, 10% for new credit. That leaves 30%. We're missing something. What do you suppose that 30% is? It's a rhetorical question. I know you can't answer me, but again, you can pause the video or you can just let me do my thing. Okay. 30% of your score is balances, what you owe. Now, some people would have gotten this right away, but when I do this exercise, a lot of people are like, yeah, what's the 30%? Tell me, I want to know. It doesn't really occur to them. And it's understandable. It's not something we think about all the time. But 30% for what you owe. Think about that. If 30% of your score is based on what you owe, obviously that means 70%. 70% of your score has nothing to do with what you owe. That means, that explains why people walk into my office all the time with $40,000, $90,000, $172,000 of debt. And they say, well, yeah, I know I got all this debt, but my credit's amazing. Of course it is. They're doing everything properly except for the actual balances. Think about it. If you're carrying all this debt, you didn't do it overnight, so you've probably had that credit for a long time, 15% of your score. You're making your regular payments, probably minimum payments, but that still counts, 35% of your score. You have all kinds of different credit. You probably have a loan. You probably have multiple credit cards. You maybe even have lines of credit. That's good for credit type. And you also are always seeking new credit because you always need new credit to take care of the old credit. That's 10% as well. The only thing harming you is your balances are getting higher and higher and higher. But here's a neat trick. What happens when your balances get right about there? Here's the threshold and here's your balance. Isn't this when a letter usually shows up either through email or in the mail and it says, hey, congratulations, you know that credit card you have with a $5,000 limit? Well, guess what? It's now $9,000. Your threshold just went up, and as a result, your balance in relation to the threshold went down, which keeps your credit score high, which means you do this. Wow, my credit's so good. I better pay the bill. It's brilliant. And by brilliant, I mean evil. It's a horrible, horrible, horrible thing. What this does is it dupes people into thinking, hey, you're doing all right. You're not doing all right. If your balances are getting higher and higher and you're making minimum payments and you need to rely on more credit just to pay the initial credit, that's a recipe for disaster, and that's when you usually see a guy like me. Now, I'm grateful for the opportunity. But the reason I said, are you sitting down, is most people don't realize that what they owe is only 30% of their score, and it can be manipulated very easily. And what that means is you can be drowning in debt and still have fantastic credit. The default assumption is that, well, if this guy is sitting in front of a guy like me, and he's drowning in debt, his credit must be terrible. No, about half my clients have what would be considered excellent credit. They qualify for a mortgage, at least on the credit side. They don't qualify because of their high debt and they don't have the down payment and so forth. That was a previous video. But this really shocks a lot of people, and it should. It is shocking. And it just it speaks to as far as I'm concerned, the utter worthlessness of the credit score for the most part. All the credit score tells someone is how likely is this guy to pay a bill on time. I suppose that matters, but it's a very small part of the story. And unfortunately, this permeates into the rest of life. I've often been shocked by people's stories of what it was like to try to get to rent an apartment, or to just rent anything for that matter. And the landlords, will rent people the moon, if they owe the moon, because they look at the credit report and they see a high score, what's seemingly a high score. Oh, look, this guy has a 700 something, and that's it. And they'll look and they'll say, okay, he has a credit. Maybe they'll look a little deeper. They'll say, okay, he has a credit card, he has a line of credit, but hey, it says R1, it says, I1 for the loans, has a car loan, everything is good standing, no late payments. Well, this guy must be great. Well, I suppose he is. He's likely to pay. But they don't seem to really focus in on the important part, which is, wow, this guy makes 60 grand a year and he owes $47,000. Do you think this might make it difficult for him to pay his rent? Hopefully this guy can keep getting more credit, because chances are, left to his own devices, just cash, he can't pay. So landlords will approve someone because they have this great credit score, even though they're drowning in debt. Meanwhile, if someone restructures and their score goes down, but now they have no or little or less debt, and they have a payment plan that they can manage, and they can actually afford to pay the landlord, no, you're too risky. Now, I should clarify. In over 10 years and over 2,000 clients, I've never had anyone skunked. They've always been able to find a place to rent if they happen to be in a transition period and they have to leave their prior residence. But sometimes they have to try a little harder. I tell people, look, you may have to knock on 2 or 3 or 7 doors or something like that. It's annoying. But again, it speaks to just not only how ridiculous I think the system is, but how it's... people are so lacking in education when it comes to the credit score. And it's something that's really taken over. It permeates so many parts of our lives. Not only, can I obtain credit? Can I obtain a mortgage? Can I rent a place? I've heard stories of people, they apply for a job and they want to do a credit check. I had a client, this is a true story. He applied for a job where his job was to monitor gas pumps. So he'd be staring at a video screen, monitoring the gas pumps. So I think he was looking for people, obviously, stealing or trying to, run away or whatever it is. And they wanted to do a credit check on him. Can you tell me what his credit has to do with his ability to monitor gas pumps? Now people will say, oh, but it goes to trustworthiness. It shows character. Nah, it really doesn't. It really doesn't. Yes, someone with poor character is more likely to have a lousy credit score than a good credit score. Though I've met plenty of people with great credit scores who I wouldn't trust to even, just sit in my office alone for, 30 seconds as I go to take a leak. And I've met people with dreadful credit scores who owe the world, who I would trust to babysit my son. Okay? That right there, if someone says, well, it goes to credibility, that's just your typical HR dits. Apologies to people who work in HR. I know you're not all the same, okay? The guys up top usually are. But now that I've offended a portion of the population. It really doesn't, okay? As I already said, you can be drowning in debt and have fabulous credit. You can have lousy credit and be out of debt. Okay, but it's a chilling effect. This, I can understand even if someone might be dealing with trust accounts, why you might want to know their credit score, but the rest of it doesn't really make sense to me. And even then, I would argue someone who's gotten out of debt, who's restructured their debt, who's done a proposal or even done a bankruptcy is under less pressure than someone who's trying to rob Peter to pay Paul and managing his credit and constantly worrying about where he's going to come up with money. That to me is a risk. That's a greater risk than anyone who's done any kind of restructuring. Anyways, this could go on for a while. But moral of the story is a good credit score does not necessarily mean you're good. And a bad credit score does not necessarily mean your situation where you are bad. Okay? The credit score is based on helping the creditors determine who is most likely to keep paying me regardless of their situation. Who's willing to stay in debt the longest. Okay, that's a very jaded view, but I think I've earned it. Have a great day, and hopefully you didn't fall down.